What is going on, everybody? Welcome back into Valley Studios. Now, today in the studio, we're going to be working with two things. We're going to be working with monster clay as well as the Peregrine Falcon. Now, this is a sculpture diorama that I've been working on for the last 5 to 6 months or so, and it's came a long way in the overall processes of completion. We are at the point now where I'm going to be working on applying some of the feather texture, sculpted feather texture, down the back of the bird. There's a lot of feathers that we want to incorporate into this, but one thing is we want to make sure that it's an actual visual sculpture, but also apply a lot of detail to it so that way we can capture those feather textures in the latex casting and mold making process. So sit back and enjoy, guys, as we sip some coffee, block in, and apply the sculpted details to the back of this awesome raptor. Alright, you guys, so here we are with our Peregrine Falcon that we've been working on for the last few content videos that have been released. I've actually been working on this Peregrine Falcon for almost 6 months, and it's came so very far. So I recommend you check out all of the other videos. Now, as you can see here, we have majority of the Falcon's head completely sculpted out there, and we'll do some refinement on that as we go. But we're working on these sides of the feathers here, as well as the other side. So we're going to be mirroring the straps of the feathers across the left-hand side here. Now, one thing that you'll notice is the bird is slightly facing forward on the stump that he is perched on here. Now, we made that in a separate video, so you can check that out. But here we are. We're going to begin the process of these feathers by blocking in the general shapes and the kind of depth of the clay that we need. Using your fingers here, you can kind of gauge how far out you would like for those shoulder muscles to be, where they come down to the outside edges of the wing, where they curve back to the larger feathers around the tips of the wings, as well as the tail feathers. So we're going to go ahead and build this up here. Now, when we get around to the interior portion of the wings, that's when we're going to start to thin those wings out quite a bit. We'll detail those, we'll remove clay and get them as thin as we would like for them to be. But we do want the interiors of the wings to be a little bit fluffy looking, kind of like tufts of fur almost. But they're actually going to be tufts of feathers. But we'll get to that in a separate video. Just remember that that's a portion of it. So the inside of the wings are kind of supposed to be kind of soft looking, where this outside portion, we really need to get great definition in these feathers. One, it's a sculpture. It's not absolutely realistic proportions. We want it to look like a sculpture, although we're going to detail it to absolute perfection. We want it to look like it is a sculpture because it is a hand created item. Okay, so if anybody were to purchase one of these in the future, even though it's casted, I want them to understand that this is sculpted by hand. You'll also notice that the wings will not be absolutely proportional to mirror the other right hand side. Now, the reason for which is because, as I stated before, the bird is facing forward a little bit, so the head is tilted to the left hand side, or the right hand side if you're facing the bird's face or the beak, and because that is facing forward towards the viewer of the actual diorama sculpture, the wing on the left hand side would be slightly dipped down. It's a minuscule amount, but it is there. We don't want this to be super symmetrical, and if we did that, it would remove some of the realism from the item. The world that we live in is not absolutely symmetrical, although if you like dissected the entire item or pulled his wings apart to the left and right hand side, it would show perfect proportions of wing texture. But because he's leaning forward a little bit on the left hand side, that front wing will be tucked ever so slightly more than the other side. That means that because that is happening, the feather formation is not exactly the same. The muscles are tensioned in a different way. Even if it's minuscule, it's there. Okay, you got to think about things like that when you're making sculptures. You got to think about how the item is shaped, the underlying muscle tone, how the feathers are laying under other feathers, and then how you're going to texture that as you kind of remove clay as you sculpt in those feathers. So as you can see here, the very first portion of this was to block in the monster clay. The second step is to go ahead and kind of detail in the actual shapes of the feathers. Now you can shave these down as much as you want. So you could make the transition line between different feather layers as minuscule and almost minute as possible to where you can't even see it. But again, we want it to look like a sculpture. We want you to understand it's a sculpture. So some of these feather textures are a little bit deeper than they normally would be. And that's completely okay. It just means that they're not super flush to one another. And it also is going to help when we go into paint it later. If light were to hit the item in different ways, you're going to see a lot more shadows underneath some of these feathers. Now we don't want any voids because we are going to be using latex to create a master mold of this later on in the process of creation. However, we do want to make sure that we're able to capture as much detail as possible. So here I am, I'm kind of shaping in each one of these wing feathers individually, and I'm doing these in kind of zones. So you can see I've already shaped in the upper portions of the shoulders, these longer feathers going towards the tail feathers in the bottom left, and then we have these long swooping, notoriously known for feathers around the outside portions of the wings. Now they're going to look a lot different when we extend those feathers down, but that is not for this content video. Okay, we're not making those super long elegant feathers right away because we still have work to do on other portions of the project. Sculpting in a center line on those feathers, and now this is my very favorite tool for making details. So again, we've blocked it in, we've got the general shapes of the feathers kind of cut in and roughed in, and now we're using a detailed dental tool that is a curved dental tool, almost a needle, and it has a concave little piece at the very end for removing and scraping away clay, but on the underside or the outside edge of it is very smooth. And I'll use that to go ahead and texture the directions of the feather segments. So whether you want the feathers to go in towards the center, or if you want them to kind of fade outward and fan outward, that depends on the viewer. I used a variety of techniques here. So sometimes I'm going towards the center of the tip of the feather. Sometimes I'm flaying those out a little bit. More so, that's really not going to be noticeable as much as just the overall the whole formation of feathers in itself. But we want to make sure we're able to capture some of those details there. So as we kind of scrape in some of these feather texture directions here, we're also detailing the kind of the overlaying joint between the feathers. So we'll work from the bottom up. That way, as we texture some of those upper feathers, it goes over the lower feathers and it makes it look even more realistic. This is a long process, guys. The weeks that I spent on this were long and tedious. And I spent probably around 2 to 3 weeks specifically on the feather formation around the back, and we're not fully done yet. This is just the general sculpting of the feather texture to show you my general steps. But it's still pretty cool, eh? What do you think, guys? So I think this sculpting video really turned out great, and I really enjoyed spending time with you here in the studio, sipping some coffee and sculpting in some fine details into each one of these feathers individually. And I do sculpt them individually, that way I can give each feather its own little focus instead of just bulking them out all at one time. And it allows you to really isolate some of the details in those. Remember, we're going to be making a mold of this in latex and then casting it in plastics later. So we want to make sure that some of these details are a little bit deeper than what you would normally see if this was the actual sculpted clay in its final form. That would be a little bit more shallow. We don't have to worry about that in this situation because, again, we're going to be using latex. You can also make your feathers a little bit smoother, as I stated earlier in the video. You can make them a little bit rougher. You can shape them, bulk them out so that they're kind of blended in a little bit better. We want to make sure that we have a lot of shadow and isolation in the feather layers so that way it really does pop when you're looking at it across the room. I want you to understand that it is a sculpted item when you are looking at it and not just something that's like 3D printed with a bunch of layers and blended all together to where you can't tell that those feathers are separated and sculpted individually. I may thin some of those feathers out along the way, but as of right now, I'm really happy with the overall feather texture across the whole back of the bird. We're going to start moving into the chest as well as the lower portions of the feathers under the tail feathers at this point. But make sure you go back in time and you can check out the overall playlist for this entire project. I've got some amazing fun project videos in that playlist for the Peregrine Falcon sculpture diorama. That's a mouthful. You can always go back and check that out. I will also link that right here if you want to check that playlist out and see some of those awesome casting, sculpting, mold making videos. As always, guys, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will catch you on the next awesome video here in Byerly Studios. Later.